Many times when you're playing with blocks, you want a different size than what was given in the original pattern. I've got Sweet Garden by Carla, designed by Carla Eisenach, that's found in Quiltmaker's 100 Blocks Volume 1. And this block was designed and patterned as a 12-inch block. But if you were to take this block and resize it into a 9-inch and 12-inch and start putting them together, you can create more interesting designs than if you only repeat the 12-inch. So with some simple tools, a calculator, and some graph paper, we're going to take a look at how to resize blocks, and I'm going to give you some formulas. And also on your disc is a worksheet, and this you can use to resize any block. After we work through today's lesson, you'll be a pro at resizing blocks. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a look at the block and dissect it a little bit. This particular block, I'm starting with a very simple one, is laid out in a 2x2 grid, and it's very easy to see that when you lay the grid on top of it. When you're looking at an actual pattern, you can be drawing on top of it or make a photocopy and draw on top of it if you don't want to do your original pattern, but look for what the grid is, and we'll look at other grid sizes later, but right now we'll start with the 2x2. So we have some graph paper here, and I have the worksheet for Summer Garden. Where I started with on this one is trying to figure out what size do I want to make this. This was patterned as a 12-inch block. So let's take it smaller and make a total size of 9 inches. And this doesn't have to be real precise, you're just playing with it for yourself. So half of 9 is going to be 4.5. So that's the finished size of these patches when you reduce this and make a smaller block. The formula for resizing squares and rectangles is to always add a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all sides of the patch. So for a simple one like this, where you're just doing squares, you're going to add 1/2 inch. So in the pattern, these are all called A's, the squares in the background. So they're finishing at 6 in the original. You cut at 6.5 by 6.5 for the original. So if you want to do a 9-inch block, that each patch is now 4.5 inch. You want to remember 4.5 there. You're going to add 1/2 inch to both of those, and you're going to cut at 5 inches by 5 inches. And that would resize this to a 9 by 9 inch block. Now, these two patches, this has applique on top of it. So now you need to know what proportion you're going so that you can take your applique designs to a copy machine and change the proportion of the applique. The way you get to the proportion of it is the new block size, 9 inches, divided by the original block size, 12 inches, and that's going to multiply it by 100 to get 75%. So now you can take your applique design your original applique design at 100%, take it to a copy machine and reduce it by 75%, and this will now fit on top of your 9-inch block when you cut these sizes. If you want to make your block bigger, you do the same thing in reverse. So now let's take the 12-inch block and we're going to make it 16 inches. So I'm going to go to a different color rather than redraw that. So if I want this to be 16 inches, now my finished size here is going to be half of that because it's a 2x2 grid, so I'm dividing this by 2. And this is going to become 8 inches. So now I want to cut my finished size, I want to be 8 inch by 8 inch. Because it's a square, I'm adding 1/2 inch. 8.5 by 8.5 will be the cut size. And to find the proportion for the applique, now I have a new block size of 16 divided by 12 is going to equal 133%. So when I take this one to the copy machine, I have to enlarge it. And you probably will need, in many cases, to copy it more than once so that you can tape together and finish filling out the pattern when you're enlarging. When you are looking at an applique design and you're trying to enlarge or reduce it, you want to be very aware of how the pattern was presented to you. I know for Quiltmaker turned edge applique, we give you the final dimensions of what the sizes are going to be and give you the instructions to add a 3/16 inch turned edge allowance. If somebody already has the turn under allowance in their pattern, you're going to want to take that off before you do your resizing on the applique. So that's a simple one, a 2x2 grid, just squares, and some simple applique. Next, we're going to take a look at some different grid sizes. Now we're going to look at Camille Roskelley's block called Ups and Downs. This is also a 12-inch block, and when you dig into it and decipher it, you'll see that it is a 4x4 grid. And transfer that over to graph paper, and you'll see that all of this is made from triangles. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about half square triangles. For squares and rectangles, it's easy to add a 1/4 inch to all sides. For triangles, if you know the formula, you'll be just fine. And by the way, the formula, there's a formula sheet on the disc as well. So I'll be referring to this, but you know that it's available for you to print out. So a half square triangle is one where you cut a square and then you're cutting it in half. Your straight of grain is going to be along the side edges. Your bias edge will be along the center. So this is the edge that will stretch. So you will keep these on the outside edges. And I'm going to show you why you add, so you want to find your finished size where you want the triangle to be on the outside edge, and you're going to add 7/8 of an inch for the cutting, and I'm going to show you why. If you have your triangle that's cut in half from a square, and if you fold up, and I'm using paper because it's easy to hold the folds and easy to see what's going on rather than fabric, and line it up 1/4 inch all the way around on all 3 sides, like that. Fold in your 1/4 inch seam allowances, and on the corner, it's easy because it works the same way for squares and rectangles. When you fold in your 1/4 inch along the stretchy edge, you'll see you have all this leftover fabric here. And so when you're looking at what the finished patch size is, if this is your finished size here, by the time you add this amount and this amount of fabric, it's 7/8 of an inch. So the formula for a half square triangle is your finished size plus 7/8 of an inch. And anytime you run into trouble with triangles, my recommendation is to cut the patches out of paper and fold them up so you can see what's going on. It's a whole lot faster and easier than trying to cut it out of fabric, sew it together, and see what's working, is to use paper. So let's go back to Camille's block Ups and Downs, and let's resize this one. So again, with the worksheet, in this case I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, and I'm going to make this an 8-inch block. So 8 divided by 4 for the grid. These are going to finish at 2 inches. So I want each of these patches to be 2 inches. And again, this block has one patch, one size patch throughout it, so it's pretty easy to convert. It starts out at a 3-inch. To convert it to an 8x8, we now want our finished size to be 2 inch by 2 inch. So we're going to add 7/8 of an inch to that, and we're going to cut 2 7/8 by 2 7/8. If you want to make it larger, in this case, taking it up to a 15-inch block, you might look at that and say, now wait a minute, how does 15 go into that? If you divide 15 by 12, it's 125%, and on your grid, 15 divided by 4 is going to give you 3 3/4 inch. So now my finished size is 3 3/4 by 3 3/4. I'm going to add 7/8 of an inch, and if you refer back to the formula, you'll see that 7/8 is 0.875. So 3 3/4 plus 0.875 is going to be a cut size of 4.625, and again, refer back to the formula chart. 0.625 is 5/8, so 4 5/8 by 4 5/8. So a couple simple formulas. Refer to the formula chart, and you can resize half square triangles to any size you need to. Okay, now that you know how to resize squares and triangles and half square triangles, I'm going to go to a couple blocks that are a little more interesting. This first one is called Little Boxes, and it was designed by Brenda Grels. And this one initially looks like a 2x2 grid, but when you really dig in and look at the patches in the little boxes, you'll see that it's a 6x6 grid. And so I'm going to take my graph paper, and as I draw this on graph paper, I want to show the individual patches. I don't want to see the whole 6x6 grid. So I know I'm going in half here, and then I have this block, and then I have a half square triangle, another square, another half square triangle, another square, and another half square triangle. And down here, it's the same thing. We've got the 4x4 patch, square, half square triangle. And so now, but now I do know that this is a 6x6 grid, 2, 3. And so as I try to decide how I want to resize this one, I want to make sure that these numbers here are going to be easily rotary cuttable, and that this is going to have that 7/8 of an inch added to it. But the 1/8 inch lines should be pretty easy to follow on just about any cutting ruler. So for Brenda's block, I'm going to start by making it half size. So a 6x6 finish size. So I want to look at the finished sizes of all of these patches. And this stuff is all copied down from the pattern. And by the way, the patterns for these blocks are all on the disc as well for the original 12-inch sizes. So from the original pattern, I want to transfer my letters here as well so that I know and these are half square triangles made from the A's. So as I'm looking at this over here, I'm going to a 6-inch block. So on my grid, 6 divided by 6 is 1, so I know that this grid is going to equal 1 inch. So my A's now I want to finish at 1 by 1, and these are half square triangles. So I'm going to add 7/8, so 1 7/8 by 1 7/8. My B is a 2. This one is a square this time. It still wants to finish at 1 by 1, but now I'm going to cut these at 1 1/2 by 1 1/2. The C is the 4x4 patch, and this time, because it's on this grid, it's a 2 by 2. For the finished size, I will add 2 1/2 by 2 1/2. And the D on this scale now is a 3 by 3 finish, and that will be a cut size of 3 1/2 by 3 1/2. So again, simple formulas, draw it out, figure out your new grid size, and then from there your finished size of each patch, and from that use the formulas to determine what the cut size is. So I'm going to do one more that's a 6x6 grid, just for practice. And this is a block designed by me in the 100 Blocks Volume 1 issue. And again, just to show you that it's a 6x6 grid. So some of these, sometimes they're very obvious to look at and see what the 6x6 grid is. Sometimes you have to look more closely to see that it is indeed a 6x6 grid. So for this one, again, I want to draw my patches so that I can use that to determine what the new patch sizes are going to be. And then I need to add my patch letters so I know where things are coming. So this half square triangle unit comes from the A's. This one comes from the B's. And again, the patterns are on your disc. This is also a D. This one's the E, and this one's an F. And then pulling out the worksheet. So let's resize this one to a 9-inch block. And again, knowing where the 6x6 grid is, 9 divided by 6 is going to mean that this is 1 1/2 inches. So the A is going to be 2 of those, so that's going to finish at a 3 inch by 3 inch. And again, this is a half square triangle, so 3 7/8 by 3 7/8. And this one's a little tricky because we have 2 different sizes of half square triangles this time. So now this on the 1 1/2 inch scale grid, you're going to have 1 1/2, 3, 4 1/2. This one will finish at 4 1/2 by 4 1/2. And so now your cut size is going to be 4.5 plus 0.875. Is 5 3/8. And again, the 1/8 decimal to fraction conversion is on your worksheet. The C is a 2 by 4 originally, and now it's at a scale of 1.5, so now it's 3 by 1.5, or 1.5 by 3. It's a rectangle, so you're going to add 1/2 inch to both patches, and you're going to cut at 2 by 3.5. The D's are going to be 3 by 4.5 for the finish size, so your cut size is 3.5 by 5. Your E is going to be 1.5 by 4.5. And again, add 1/2 inch to both sizes for the cut size, so 2 by 5. And finally, your F is going to be 1.5 by 9, because that's the height of the block now. And so you'll cut 2 inches by 9.5 inches. So it's as simple as breaking it down to the patch sizes, seeing what the grid is, finding the size you're looking for, and doing a little bit of simple math to convert your squares and rectangles and your half square triangles to create a new size block. And we have one more thing to take a look at, and that's going to be quarter square triangles. And finally, we're going to take a look at Daisies, a 12-inch block by Dudley Lee Paulson. This one is also a 4 by 4 grid, and this time it's going to have half square triangles. It has the applique, and we're going to add quarter square triangles to the list of formulas that you're learning. So I have already drawn this out on my graph paper and transferred the patch information here from the pattern. And first I'm going to tell you a little bit more about quarter square triangles and show you how that formula works. So quarter square triangle is a square cut on both diagonals, and your finished edge shown on your graph paper corresponds to the outside edge of the square. So your bias stretchy seams are along the diagonals. Your straight of grain is on the outside edges, all the way around. And so the formula you need to learn, and this has the 1/4 inch seam allowances drawn in red. So you can see this is your finished size here, which would correspond in scale to the finished size here on this triangle. And you're going to add 1.25 inches to your finished size to know what size square you're going to cut to do the quarter square triangle. And I'm going to pull in the worksheet and the pattern. One of the things I've been doing so far as I've shown you this is just kind of jumping into it. I want to show you that all of the information that I've had on this side corresponding to the original block is information that I deciphered from the pattern here. And so my patch letters come from here, and the cut size comes from here, but then I'm using the scale on the grid to figure out what this finished size is. So when I know this is a 12-inch block, I know that this is 6 inches. And so I take this 6 inches, and that's my finished size here that I've already added in. And normally, this would jump then to 1/2 inch to 6.5 by 6.5, but as you see, this one also has applique in the center. And one of the things you want to learn about applique is that sometimes it can pull in your edges. So we always give you a little bit more. So the formula here, because this is applique, is to go up by 1/2 inch and then add another inch. So we cut this one 7.5 by 7.5 and then trim to 6.5 by 6.5 for after the applique, and that would be your final size as you put it in. So you have to kind of decipher in the pattern what's happening so that you can get to your final cut size here. And as you look at this, that's where you see this is a quarter square triangle as you're deciphering the pattern. So the quarter square triangle, the 6 inches here, becomes 7.25 because you add 1/4 inch to quarter square triangles. And your F's that make your half square triangles here are 3 inches at the original size, and you add the 7/8 of an inch for the half square triangle. So what I want to do now, though, is take this block and make it larger. And as I'm trying to figure out how much larger I want to make it, I actually want to jump back a little bit and talk about the grid and why I've been showing you what the grid is and how the grid works. So this is a 6 by 6 grid. This one was a 4 by 4 grid. Now sometimes you know what size block you're trying to make, and then you just have to see and make sure that the grid is going to work. What you want is that when you're doing this scale here, you want to make sure that these patches are easily rotary cuttable, and that's going to be the fractions you're most familiar with as a quilter. 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch. If you get much smaller than that, you can still cut smaller dimensions, smaller fractions, but they do become a little bit fussier to try to get to. So you want to make sure that you're getting in your grid a fraction that's easily rotary cuttable. And so, for example, if I was trying to make this bigger, and I know it's a 6x6 grid, and I went to 18 inches, I would take 18 divided by 6, and that would give me 3. So 3 inches, I can easily cut that with a rotary. If I was trying to make a 15-inch block, and I'm dividing that by 6, that's 2.5. Again, I can easily do that because I can add 1/2 an inch for squares and rectangles, 7/8 of an inch for triangles, or 1 1/4 for triangles. If I really was trying to aim for a 13-inch block, divide that by 6. That would mean these have to be able to be cut 2.166, and that's not easily cuttable. So you're using the grid to find a good dimension that's going to work. So if you needed a 13-inch block and you're playing with a 6x6 grid, that one's not going to work easily. I'd suggest finding a different block. The good thing with the 4x4 block grid is that most of those dimensions are going to always be easily cuttable, rotary cuttable, because when you divide by 4, you're going to get 1/4, 1/2, or 3/4 all the way through. And so we're going to take this, and we're going to blow this up even bigger to make a crib-size quilt. So our final dimension, what we're aiming for, is a 36 by 36 inch block. Because there is applique involved, I need to know the proportion, and again, that's the final size divided by the original, and you're going to multiply by 100, and you're going to see that that's 300%. And so when you take your original applique design, take it to a copy machine, blow it up to 300%, and in this case, the petals on the bee are all the same, so I don't need to tape it together to make it all fit. I can just keep repeating this bee when I'm doing my fusible applique, and I can turn my pattern around on the fusible to finish out the circle for the C. So use the proportions to see how to resize your applique. And we'll just do a quick run through on this. So now with the grid, again, I'm aiming for a 36-inch block. 36 divided by 4, because it's a 4x4 grid, is 9 inches. That means every section in my 4-inch grid is going to be 9 inches. And I can use this grid now and this graph paper to determine what my finished sizes are going to be. So A is 2 of those, so it's going to finish at 18 by 18. If I don't have any applique, I would cut this at 18.5 by 18.5. But because I'm adding applique, which can shrink the fabric in a little bit, I'm going to cut 19.5 by 19.5. And after the applique, then I will trim it down to the 18.5 by 18.5. B and C are the applique patches, so I'm going to change those on a photocopier. And then D is the 1/4 square triangle. It's 18 inches across on the outside edge of the triangle. So I'm going to add 1 1/4 inches to that, 19.25 by 19.25, and I'll cut that in half twice diagonally to get these D patches. And then E is a triangle. And again, the finished edge is going to be 9 inches, so I'm going to add 7/8 to it and cut it in half diagonally. And the F is the same size. It finishes at 9, and because it's a triangle, 9 7/8 by 9 7/8. The difference here between the E and the F is that on the E, I'm going to cut my square, cut in half diagonally, and I'm going to take that E patch and sew it to my D patch. And so I'm actually cutting the triangle. The F, when you decipher the pattern, you're cutting the square and you're leaving it as 2 squares that you'll sew together to form a triangle square unit. So you're going to cut first, you're going to cut your square, you're going to sew your squares together along the diagonal, and then you're going to cut. So the math is the same, it's just a matter of where you do your cutting for those. And so that is how you would resize this to a 36-inch block. And then by adding a few borders to the outside edge, you would have a nice sized baby quilt. So learning how to resize blocks gives you a whole new arsenal of things to play with when you're looking at a block magazine or a block book. And just to go back and the ones we looked at earlier, with Summer Garden, this was a 12-inch block here. And by resizing it to a 9-inch block, you can play with a lot of fun ways to create a multi-size block from the same one. And then with the ups and downs block, if this is your 12-inch block inside, you can resize to a 6-inch block, and all of a sudden you can play with making that block into a really fun border. And again, because you've just learned how to form a grid on this, you would easily be able to figure the dimensions of what you need to turn the corner from here to here on this kind of a block. So I hope you spend some time with the worksheets and playing with blocks. It's drawing on graph paper and learning the formulas, and the formulas are what lead you to be able to easily resize blocks.